Summer Championships here, joined by some familiar faces.
Who are you?
Yes, my name is Travis Gafford.
Oh, okay.
What is your name?
What do you do here?
I don't know, I've been trying to figure that out for the last 13 years. I'm hoping next year is the year I figure it out. Who are you?
My name is David Turley, also known as Phreak. I used to shoutcast, and now I give Champions 3 AD.
Okay, fantastic. And who's this lovely gentleman saying? There's a mic right next to you. If you would also like to introduce yourself.
My name is Nick Phreak, also known as N-Step. I'm the guy who makes items cost 35 less gold, like Amp Tome.
Awesome. I'm glad that this is how we're introducing you both of you. People know you have very specific jobs. And to my right is somebody who has teleported in for this part of the conversation. What's your name?
Matt Samuelson, aka Cubby.
Yeah, where are you calling from?
Los Angeles, California.
Yeah. Well,
Inglewood, California, actually.
Oh, that's right. Sorry, I had myself in the home studio setup.
I think isn't Inglewood part of Los Angeles? Are we in Los Angeles?
Technically a different city, right?
The county.
Yeah. Well,
maybe.
I don't know. So it's funny because
it's the LA metropolitan area.
There's a
I'm
bunch of
sure.
like Culver City is part of Los Angeles, even if it's like a suburb.
Even though you'd write it on your address that it's Culver
What
City.
is the address?
This is what people tuned in for. Please
Yes.
keep going with topography.
We're trying to figure it out. Listen, we're here for an hour. We've got time. All right. So what brings both of you here out to FanFest?
I was told to be here.
So,
I was asked if I wanted to be here, and I said yes.
Occupational
I was
responsibilities.
not told that it was with you. Wouldn't have changed my answer, but
Okay, good.
I'm here all the same. No, it's fun.
Thanks for
it's fun to
sharing
hang out. I'm gonna catch all the booths once we're done here. But chatted with some fans already, took some pictures, did some autographs. There's a guy with a Jarvan 4 license plate. Shout out if you're around. But here to chat.
Yeah. What are you enjoying about FanFest so far?
Honestly, I haven't been to that many finals events or anything like that. I've gone to a few of their like regular LCS events, but this has been really cool. Just seeing all the people. I've mostly been watching. No one knows who I am, so everyone's going up to David here, and they're all like, "Wow, Phreak, please sign my license plate."
Yeah.
And then they don't know who I am, so they just ignore me. Yeah.
You Because you moved over to the League team in the last couple of years, right?
So I bounced around a little bit. I was on League. I started back on League in 2017. Then I moved to Wild Rift. Then, I was doing a bunch of the balance and system stuff, kind of similar to what David does now when I was on Wild Rift. And I also did kind of similar content where I made like streams and stuff and talked about the patch, and then people would yell at me, kind of very similar stuff.
Gotcha.
And then I more recently moved back to League to work on the the current season, the preseason for the current season. So that's like the item stuff was mostly me.
Yeah. And then because I know a lot of people know what you do, but just in case anyone is missing, what besides adding AD to stuff, what is your day-to-day like?
Yeah, so I'm a game designer. I'm on the live pod of League of Legends for 7/5 team. So basically it's I'm the design lead on that one, so it's a mix of what we want to do, where we're kind of shaping the game. I'm not the only person who does that, of course. And usually in any individual patch cadence, if it's not like 14.1 or 14.10 or whatever, like 70-80% of the sort of individual changes have gone through me in some form. Either I implemented them or okay that we should do them. Or ask that we do them or whatever. And so like, hey, the Worlds patch is coming out in about a week, right? 14-18. It's like, oh, okay, yeah, like a lot of people are involved, but like ultimately a lot of stuff is my call of like, yes, we should nerf Jarvan or buff Jarvan. Yes, we should buff Ahri. Yes, we should nerf Azir. Okay. And then, do some of the implementation on that as well.
You want to take your back here? Do you have any questions ahead of the Worlds?
Yeah, where does the marksman propaganda fit into that? Because I feel like a lot of people just they know you. That was
I used to,
and now you're it's the theory is that you made it now in the patch notes.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So the tough thing is like it takes time for systemic effects to have a really big knock-on effect, right? Like Smolder was not in pro play at all for like 6 months, and then since 0.15 with no direct Smolder changes is like 80% pick ban. It's like, well, he was probably that good a while ago, and it takes time to suss that out, right? And it's like, well, okay, well once we know that people realize Smolder is very good in these matchups and not just like as a Cassante counter pick. Okay, well, we can get data, we can act and whatnot. But a lot of stuff was under the hood for a long time. Ultimately, yeah, like AD carries taking over mid is troubling. I think there's a lot of culprits here. One, I think Merc Treads are overpowered. So if you're playing like tank or AP jungle plus AP mid, Merc Treads like auto wins the game, it feels like, because now neither of you have any pressure on the most important lane in the game. It's a pretty big deal for 1,200 gold. So like, well, that matters, right? You can like never actually match your damage type on mid jungle. AD is fine because steel caps suck, but like AP is trash. So it's like, okay, well that's a problem, right? It's like, oh, also the lane got a lot safer, which means pushing the lane is not as dangerous. So if you're gonna like go auto clear a bunch of waves and right click the turret with like Tristana or something, well, it's a lot harder to punish you. And of course, that was done to make Annie not fall over the second Sejuani walked into mid, and like it was valuable for that. But it also made Tristana almost unpunishable. Oh crap, okay, well that took a little while for people to figure out that Tristana is actually the best mid laner in the game, because she wasn't immediately 100% in spring, right? She was there, she's like top 6, but like she wasn't number 1, right? She was like 48 in solo queue, and Pro's like, yeah, I'm out for a while. Now she's like 45 in solo queue, and Chobi's like, Tristana's up, locking it in. So that's the weird thing, right? Is it takes time for the best players in the world to like solve out the like actual macro implications, the actual sort of metagame implications. And so we're playing catch up a lot of the time because turns out Chobi's better than me at League, right? He's gonna know what's good in mid better than I ever will, or anyone on the team ever will. And so we have to take those cues, and you know, even that for the best, like for the world's best, takes time to learn.
I do find it interesting, like especially with a champ like Smolder, right? I feel like the Triforce build really kind of helped propel him back in.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden then you're matching the spikes that Corki has, which is like a really meta blind. But when it comes to like bigger picture, I know you mentioned the Worlds patch. One of the traditions that Riot's had with the Worlds patch is trying to give small changes to some champs, bring it back in the meta, see if they can make an appearance. But also, what's it like, having that longer patch cycle? I know that it doesn't affect the ladder itself, but kind of seeing that impact on pro, like, have you guys actually ever considered a longer patch cycle? Because for me as a fan, I really like it. I feel like at least watching pro, seeing players innovate within a patch kind of forces players to get used to stuff that, oftentimes like a Nasus right now, like people can look at that and just be like, hey, like the E's getting destroyed next patch. Maybe we don't have to play it. But if you have a 6-week patch cycle, like you do have to figure out how to play it and how to play around it. So like, what's it like kind of watching that tournament pan out for you now as a game designer?
Right, because they're just on the patch for a while and they're sorting out over time.
Yeah.
We always make expectations of what we think is actually good. My crystal ball pick for Worlds this year is Yone. And like,
was it win rate? Because I actually had him too. But I also hate that champ.
I don't know. I have to like double check, but it's like I think Yone's just going to be like the guy.
Yeah.
Fair, I had like Neela 3 years ago, and like Guma played her once, right?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, okay, they're just not playing this champion. So I've been wrong before, but Yone's getting play, and new Shieldo's better for him, and new Fleet's better for him. So like, there's a chance. Yeah. So like, we expect people to like learn and adapt over time. I think back to like Zyra was suddenly the support pick back in like 2017 or something.
Yeah.
And then it was like, wait a second. MFE beats Zyra plant, and it's like, and then we saw a bunch of MF in solo queue, and it's trash in every other matchup. So it's cool to see that, right? It's cool to know that, like, oh, this stuff was always there, and that's like the one thing that I hope sort of viewers will give us slack around is that like just because you're seeing it right now doesn't mean it's optimal. It just means that pros haven't had time to figure out the next step yet. And some of that is, you get 6 weeks to figure it all out. They get, a few weeks right now as downtime. Like if you're in the LEC, you've been out for a week or so, like you're not even playing on 16, you get to immediately leap forward. And like, Genji's got to go win this weekend, right? And TL's got to go win this weekend or lose, we'll see. But it's like, yeah, some people get to like do bigger prep and then figure out what's the big thing. And so, yeah, seeing week 1 versus finals in Worlds is usually very different.
Yeah. I always think about the Victor pick in the Aatrox season 8 too.
Oh yeah.
That emerged like in playoffs or the range supports at MSI in 15. It is really cool to see like the best players in the world actually get to innovate when the game stays the same.
How much pressure is there on the design team for like the Worlds patch? Like, is there a lot of emphasis put on like, oh, this is the Worlds patch and everybody's gonna be watching it, and if we do something wrong or some item is off, like everybody's gonna be complaining about it, or does it feel more like a patch that is just every patch? I don't know.
There's definitely more pressure on it. So basically for MSI and Worlds, we like explicitly carve out time to be like, hey, designer or designers should spend some time like looking very deeply at the pro meta. Otherwise, it's like on a regular patch, it's like, okay, it's Monday morning, the patch is gonna like lock in 2 days. Hey, are there any like big pro outliers we should talk about? And it's like Corki's 100%. Oh, we should nerf Corki, and then like move on, right? Because we are normally focused on the regular game every other patch. In this case, yeah, it's like it's Worlds. This matters a lot, and again, true for MSI as well, where it's like, okay, let's take a really deep dive, and it's like, what do we think the top 5 highest presence top laners are going to be in this patch? Like, well, it's probably still Renekton. Kasani's going to still be there, but like, if we bring up 2 other tanks, if Ornn and Sion and Shen and Malphite are all actually pretty good, then like maybe they'll play other tanks in K'Sante. And hey, in the jungle, it's like, okay, it's really top heavy on Maokai. They've like pro teams have really like cultivated like, Maokai's the guy, Sejuani's clearly second, Skarner's clearly third. Okay, we'll bring down the top a bit here. Vi's the only good fighter. Let's bring up some fighters to like try to match Vi. So here's Jarvan, here's Xin Zhao, here's Viego. Okay, what's in mid? Okay, do we think we finally addressed AD carries appropriately? Okay, I think so. Okay, we'll still go after Corki and Smolder, a little bit of Zeri, but like, okay. And just like, it's like figuring out like what things we think are reasonable. There's a fairly low tolerance that we'll do it a little bit for like, this champ's now OP in solo queues that pros will play here. Like Camille's probably OP. I think she's the best top laner. And we get like 1 game out of 20. It's like, all right, we'll leave her for 1 more patch. Nerf her eventually, but like it's Worlds. We'll see if pros will play Camille. Like that kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Nick, you laughed when I asked this question. Is there a big conversation behind the scenes whenever these things pop up?
Yeah. So for context, I when I first started working at Riot, I was working on all sorts of different stuff, not in design. One of the things I worked on was Pantheon. And if you remember, when Pantheon got reworked, the VGU, he was 100%. I don't remember if he got any games. I think he was just banned every game on Red Side at Worlds. And that came from, we shipped him, he was underpowered, and then we buffed him, and the buff was way bigger than we thought on the Worlds patch. And it just suddenly was like, I remember I was talking with pro players at the time, because when we were doing the buffs, I was talking with a bunch of pro players, and they were all like, champ sucks, no one's going to play him. We were like, all right, let's buff him. You know what? It's fine. Let's give the solo queue players what they want. And then we overbuff him, and it's just every single game, I remember we opened up the first few game of Worlds plans, and it's just every game, it's just Red Side, first ban, Pantheon, and we're just like, oh no, not again.
He won't 1-0 in the tournament.
Oh, he was
He
1-0?
got
Yeah, 1-0.
Wow. Okay, I don't even remember that, but yeah, that's just that feeling of despair is just what I'm reminded of whenever I hear about the Worlds patch, and it's like everyone who works on these has their own oh, this is the thing that we made a mistake on that I remember from Worlds 2017 or
It's
whatever.
like, it becomes like trauma.
Yeah, it's the trauma, and now it's kind of funny like looking back at it, but that's what I think of when I'm thinking of like, is there more pressure on the Worlds patch? And the answer is absolutely yes, like absolutely.
I don't think I've made it in 100% yet. I mean, like there was 6% Maokai, but that's solo queue only. But I don't think I've had 100% yet. Where fingers crossed, I don't screw that up yet.
Not yet.
If it's Corki Azir all Worlds, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry if that happens. Fingers crossed, okay?
Is it crazy to think also the fact that like just changing a couple digits somewhere also influences like what skins get made for the champions at the end of it? Like it's kind of funny how that ends up working out, right?
Yeah, no, Pantheon skin, because no one could play him, That's great. But yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way, right? But yeah, you're right, I know a lot of times though is like, oh, this player wants the skin, so it's like, oh, it's like day 5 of group stage, we're already 4-0. Locked my favorite champion. In case I win Worlds. We lost to TL, doesn't matter. And then, like,
Exactly. It doesn't. They should always do that against Team Liquid.
Yeah, they would have lost anyway. Exactly. Doesn't matter.
Exactly. How are you doing, Cubby? Any thoughts on any of the stuff that we might see this weekend that you want to tie back into a question on balance or anything?
Because
we've been seeing lane swaps, obviously.
Yeah, lanes. I mean, though that got changed though. That one's gonna be interesting actually, because I have a theory that lane swaps will stick around. You just don't take points. You just like go for the dive and kills, which that'll be interesting to see. But I know that you just did a big sit down with LS.
Yeah.
That I've yet to go through, but in a lot of that you talk about like kind of like the theory of like how to balance, and the fact that I think there was something said in there like when League is in a decent spot, you almost feel like it's harder like to balance. I'm kind of wondering like I feel like the game's in a decent spot right now, and I say that having faced Vlad W Max top in the last game I just queued up for, which I'm not gonna bring that up.
It doesn't actually win that many games, but it's clearly frustrating.
Yeah, it was pretty frustrating. But like, where do you want to see the game go? Especially like, it almost feels like Worlds is kind of like the culmination of balancing for the split. What happens like next? Like, how do you decide like what to add to the game? It's the 15th year of League coming up. Like, without teasing anything, like, how long is that process for you guys sitting down and thinking about, hey, what's up next and where do we want the game to go and what kind of additions can we make? Because looking back, I think changes like Grubs were great, just giving you guys another lever to pull on the top side and like having another tool to balance so that a good team really can't be like 5:30 Drake, 8:30 Rift Herald, 11-minute Drake, and you're behind, right? So what kind of goes into that process of like, hey, what's the league gonna look like 6 months from now?
Usually people better than me are the ones doing the big stuff. Like, to be fair, there have been some discussions actually quite recently about like, hey, so where do we want to take League in the next few years? And like, this is a pretty ongoing discussion here, and we'll be part of it at least to some degree. And so yeah, it's like, oh, like, do we care about complexity a lot, or do we like, do we want games to be closer for longer? Like, these are like very like gameplay balance things in some cases, but there's other stuff that I'm just like not going to talk about that are like more broad scope. But it's like, hey, so imagine a world where it is harder to snowball and also harder to come back. And so it's like, if kills are worth less gold and turrets are worth less gold, but like objective bunnies are deleted from the game. Like, as an example, as a hypothetical of like what that would look like. It's like, oh, it'll take longer to be like, we're definitely winning the game. But also, once you're ahead, you're like, cool, now we get to win the game. And it's like, that's a different flow of the game. That's going to feel differently. But it's like, we would playtest that for a while, see how that feels, and be like, all right, yeah, if we think like the game should be closer for longer, so we have to like lower the rewards of the winning team, but then reduce comebacks. Okay, well, that is a direction we could take the game that like might make the game feel better. And that's not like, oh, we gave 3 AD, whatever. It's like a real reason to be like, we want the like flow of progression in League of Legends, which you will feel every single game to be 10-20% different, and we think that'll make the game more fun. And it's like, and that might come out some patch, right? But like, that would be the kind of stuff that's like, that's an example of like a longer term issue.
Oh, go ahead.
I know you said this weekend. I kind of jumped forward.
No, you're good.
But
Corki is here.
yeah, that's why we buffed Smolder, right? Discover the Triforce.
Yeah, Corki Smolder now. That's
Yeah.
better, right? Corki Smolder's better than Corki is here?
Dragon.
Yeah, no, exactly.
No dragon enjoyers.
One of the really two of the really big changes that happened this split when talking with pros was removing Tenacity from the rune tree. Only having it as the point, which isn't super popular. Because I think on flinching and the rune you could get like 30, 40%. And then also the increase of jungle XP. Like for you, like where do you feel like that kind of led to things this split? It's had a really big impact on that role. But like as the split's gone on, I feel like you really had the balanced jungle. Like, hey, we do feel like the AP junglers that clear in 305 are a little bit oppressive. And then bringing back the junglers like traditionally Malachi and his kit's insane. Like where do you feel like that's kind of landed?
So it's interesting because obviously there's like all the metagame implications of like what pros are actually playing, what's winning a whole bunch of games. And the thing is like those are tunable by like game balance, right? Like we can drop some numbers. So like as an example, I was looking at some master data recently. Sejuani is like the number 2 tank jungler, right? She's like number 4 overall jungler in pro play. And the thing is in solo queue, most people are just inexperienced at her.
Yeah.
So she's like actually for solo queue 1% underpowered, but she's a CC champion, so she's pro skewed, of course, right? But she's like 47% win rate, but like that's fake because people just are everyone's first time Sejuani for some reason. But regardless, it's like the impetus there was, hey, I think runes should exist, right? I think making pre-game choices for your champion is interesting. And I think broadly speaking, the best place for those choices are, this makes my champion better. So weirdly, Mana Flow Band is a pretty cool rune because it's like, oh, I have mana concerns. I'm going to go Mana Flow. I'm going to feel smart about it. And it's just like, yes, every single stringent and every single game always runs Mana Flow. But center players are like, but I want Mana Flow because I'm smart. I made the right choice. And that's totally reasonable. I think that's totally fine. The stuff that I was personally not a fan of is like, oh, here's a rune choice that invalidates someone else's champion. So it's like, oh, okay, I loaded into the game with 60 tenacity.
Yeah.
I guess your champ doesn't matter. And it's like, they can't do anything about that. It's not like Brittle is actually a good stat and like available anywhere meaningful. Like Anathema wasn't actually a very good item, and Ornn exists, but whatever. So it's like, oh, okay, Malkash is invalidated. Neat, that's fun. And so I would rather it's like, okay, fighters who need tenacity and need slow resist, like Starets can be good, Wit's End could be good, Dead Man's Plate can be good. Like that's fine. Like that should be an option. And so that like if you need to break out of crowd control, you can do it. But at least like for the first bit of the laning phase, the CC champions like their champions function. So that's like where my thought process was with like why I pushed for doing this. And it might be that like now the total amount of tenacity in League of Legends is too low. That might be totally true, right? Because we didn't add as much as we took away, generally speaking. I mean, yes, Wits and Sterix got it and you can buy them, but that was what that push was. Then again, these like knock-on effects take time to suss out, and it's like, oh, pros are playing CC champions. Well, yeah, they're more coordinated. Like I should expect that to happen kind of generically. That's just going to be true. Like junglers are way more selfish in solo queue than they are in pro play. Turns out Hecarim's good in solo queue and not in pro. Who would have thought? And like this is just going to be true for a long time in a very coordinated environment, and some of that can just be okay. Just like that's just kind of how the game works. So I kind of defend that like we made champions be able to do their thing, and runes can be about you, and I think that's good. That's a good place for pre-game choices to be. And for now, I'm pretty happy with them.
Yeah, Nick, we had before this a couple people on stage who were saying, "Oh, we really hope MF doesn't get picked this weekend because she's boring." She just like ults and that's it. Whenever you hear stuff like that, does that feel bad? Is that like, oh, that's just, this champion can be really fun to play, but maybe not as fun to watch? Like, what is sort of the mentality whenever people have those kind of sentiments?
So my thought on that is like almost anything, even if the gameplay is like truly criminal, is exciting if you see it a really small amount of the time.
Yeah.
Right? Like how many people who say I don't want to see MF would be cool with seeing MF once in a series, right?
Yeah.
Like I bet you they'd be pretty okay with it, right? I think there's very few people who would truly say like, wow, I really actually hate this champion. Don't want to see it. It's the worst thing ever, right? Like seeing something one time is really cool, which is why one of the things that David does here a lot is try to generate a 10 to 20% presence champion or something like that, right? A fringe pick that can be really really cool for some players who want to invest time into, hey, I'm the guy who picks this top lane counter pick or whatever, right? That kind of thing is really cool. And so a lot of it comes down to, okay, well, when we start seeing those champions rise above 20% presence into the 30, 40, 50, 60, like there are some champions that definitely, like, we look at them and we're like, well, maybe this, champions like Corki, I think, are a good example. Like, maybe this shouldn't be a champion who's sitting at 80% plus presence because, well, his variance in what he does is almost nothing. His landing phase is not very interesting to watch. Like, and like when you sort of formalize it and you talk about, hey, not just does it pass the like, does it feel cool to watch test of like, you don't need to see Corki rocket someone to death and then auto attack them 3 times, at 40 minutes into the game to know like, yeah, the champ's kind of boring to watch as an experience. You kind of look at it and you say like, okay, well, what do they do at in the 0 to 10 minute period? What do they do at the what's the typical experience of 10 to 20 minutes, and then what do they do later in the game? Like, what are the the powerful things that champion does, and you kind of categorize those and say, okay, which of these are good spectator experiences? And you look at a champion like Corkin, you say, not much that this champion does really, I think, is a good spectator experience. And that's not to say that we don't want pro players who really like playing Corki to not have a good time or be able to pick the champion that they want to play or whatever. But it's more, hey, at the end of the day, we could, for the Worlds patch especially, say like, you know what, this champion's 60% in solo queue and we're going to make that cool, right? We obviously don't do that, right? But if we really wanted to, we could say like, we've decided that Shyvana is the coolest pro champion ever. I don't think that's true. But if we did, we could say, you know what, Shyvana, you're getting a 4% solo queue buff for one patch. And like, that's really cool. Obviously, we don't go that extreme, but there, kind of what David was talking about earlier, of like, there's smaller versions of that we do where it's like, hey, maybe Camille might, is the best top laner now on the patch. But if that creates a better, spectator experience and it's not super degrading for solo queue, that can be really good. And so that's kind of how I structure thinking about that kind of, I guess the like spectator experience, if that makes sense.
So like kind of on that note, one of the funnier pro clips I saw recently was the first time that the Nasus Garen matchup was locked in an LCK. The pros were kind of chuckling about it. How do you balance like finding a spectator experience where you might get a best of 5 that does have something like Nasus versus Garen against something else, and kind of balancing out those champs that are kind of, hey, we're gonna number check you and like skill check you in that way, and knowing the matchup rather than like Camille, where I'd say that's a little bit more skill intensive compared to others.
It's I think comes down to different types of skill, right? It's knowledge gating versus like mechanics gating, right? People would call it like hands versus brain, right? That's one way that you hear people talk about that kind of thing. And it's Tryndamere, for example, was in pro play. That wasn't that long ago that he was seeing play in mid lane, right? And mechanically speaking, there's really not much there, right? It's did you press R at the right time, and that's pretty much the only mechanic on the champion, right? But the knowledge barrier is huge, right? Like there's so many things of like, you see these Tryndamere one tricks who all in people and from thresholds that you never would have thought would be possible, and it's like, wow, that guy just knew something that I and the rest of the viewers had no concept, like no idea that was true. And it's just a different type of skill. And personally, again, it's like kind of talking to the like 10 to 20% things. It's like, I personally think the pro play experience is better when there's a mix of hands champions versus brain champions. Yeah. And it's like, hey, sometimes you load into a game and there is a Nasus or there is a Garen where, the pro player, their hands don't have to be so hot, but their brain does, right? Like, when you see people play Garen, right? Like when you saw like Adam playing Garen at Worlds, for example, and it was like, you would see him do these crazy, like, oh, he flashed on this 80 carry in side lane and killed them from this insane threshold. And you're just looking at this and you're like, wow, that's crazy. he didn't do anything mechanically crazy, but he probably put tens or hundreds of games into this champion to know that that was a kill threshold there, and that's cool, right? That's like interesting that there's a reward for putting the mastery and the understanding in on these champions, and I think that's how I look at it. Is like it's a positive, but we don't want every game to just only be a knowledge check, right? We want there to be some, hey, you can outplay this skill shot, or you can play around this specific, mechanic that is on a zero or whatever, right? Like you can play away from the soldiers, that kind of thing, right? Having a mix is, I think, how we create the best game, right?
Cubby, I think I'm going to replace you because I see someone off stage right now.
I would replace me for this as well.
Yeah, exactly. But thank you for coming up.
Yeah.
We'll see you tomorrow as my host for Hotline League.
Yeah, no, thanks so much.
Thanks, man.
Fun. Yeah.
Round of applause for Cubby. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, and we'll hot swap you in for a player from NRG, also sponsored by Kia. That was powerful. I like that. That's the shoutcasting energy. Welcome to the stage, Dokla.
Thank you for having me.
How's FanFest been for you?
It's been good. It's hot out, unfortunate,
Yes.
but it's actually nice to see everyone. I didn't expect like this level of turnout, especially so early at 9 a.m.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty nice to be here.
Yeah, we've had some a really great audience here today, and a lot of people walking around doing good stuff. We were just talking to both these wonderful devs about balance and
I heard
stuff.
something about like Tryndamere all-inning.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if like you really need to know the limits of that besides just spinning in with your Fury and hoping you crit. That's just my take.
But you can hope, but do you know?
I mean, yes, you're likely to crit, yeah, but yeah.
But I wanted to give you a chance to maybe ask them any questions, bring up any gripes that you've had over the course of this time, or as they're designing the new season patch, if there's anything that you have as a request or question.
So, well, yes, kind of targeted the lane swap. I'm not sure if it's going to be enough, personally, because people just lane swap to just get out of the first 3 levels.
Yeah, I understand
They don't really care about the gold. But we'll see how the meta develops around that, especially at Worlds. And outside of that, honestly, where do I start?
Yeah.
Oh boy! All right, let's go.
I can't be here all day. No, but overall, good job. But I think NASA's coming out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's weird, right?
Yeah, it's like people just finally caught on. They're like, oh wait, it's actually just really OP.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, overall, good job.
Do you have any hopes
Good
for
balance.
next year for what the new season patch could bring?
Honestly, I have no idea because apparently 2025 is supposed to be the big change for League. So I don't know what's gonna happen. But I'm
I think
hoping
that's
top
been
lane stays relatively the same.
I think it's been downplayed a little bit recently.
Yeah, I did.
What about
like,
on a lower level? What would be cool for
maybe
top
make
lane?
top lane a little bit more isolated? At another like.
Put some more walls up
Yeah,
there.
get
Just
walls
no
there.
junglers allowed, right?
Yeah.
Honorable duel.
Invisible wall.
You know
that
what's
just
gonna happen is
messes
Jace's gonna walk past your wave and proxy you, and you're just gonna be like, I would like a jungler now.
Well, I'm the Jace, so
No,
that's
true,
fine
right?
by me. Yeah.
Top lane will be Jace versus Vayne every game. Reddit will lose their minds.
Yeah. Actually, you mentioned Nasus. Any other highlights for you in this past year?
In terms of,
In terms of gameplay or what the meta brought?
I thought it's quite diverse, even though Cassante really took over for whatever reason. Like people weren't willing to play like, non-meta counters, and I was against. Like I was trying to beat that with like Varus and stuff, but then the lane swap happened. So then it's like you don't even have a lane phase. So picking these type of counters in lane won't really.
Yeah.
You're just gonna be worse off. So, yeah. I mean that's kind of my only take with it. Yeah.
But there's not one hope that you have for 2025. This is
One
your
hope.
opportunity to incept it into these guys as they're looking at next year.
I'm not much of
A designer.
a designer.
Okay, how about
I don't have the designer
Do
mind.
you have any questions for a pro player about what you would like to see or what he might want to see next year as you're thinking through what you're doing? I guess you have to be kind of quiet about what you're deciding, but
Yeah, I mean, I can't really talk about what I'm working on.
Sure.
You might get a sneak peek at some point, before the season comes out. But, what would I want to know?
Oh,
What do
here's
you-
one. Here's one.
Hit me.
Very, very outside. But is there ever going to be a sandbox mode like for League?
I don't know if these are
I
the
don't even know
guys
if you
to
guys
ask.
are like
Yeah,
responsible for that.
So,
but
so what do you mean by sandbox? Do you mean like practice tool with your friends, or are you talking about like practice tool, but to the moon, right? What do you
kind
look?
of to the moon. Like have replayability in aspects of that. Obviously, very far fetched given just like the history of League. But Yeah, I wonder if that's even possible.
I mean, anything's possible if you write the code, but
Yeah.
not my call.
Yeah. That's like, it's a little away from what we would make calls on. Like
Yeah.
that's not our area. But as far as like, could we do it? The answer is yeah. I mean, it's just a question of how much time would it take, and like what's the trade-off? Like, what are we not making, right? That's
Yeah,
always
yeah.
the thing is people are always saying like, why didn't you do X, or why didn't you do Y? And ultimately it just comes down to, well, what did you want us to not do, right? There's only so much that happens every day. So it's a lot about trade-offs, right?
Okay.
How different is it for you? Because it's interesting because Phreak is working on like a couple week schedule, right? Whereas you're trying to plot out like what the future looks like, and what you're working on right now is, as you said, stuff you can't even necessarily talk about yet. So what is the difference for you in terms of like just the extreme timeline where where he's switching from a couple weeks to you're switching to like months out, and with the idea of like what an entire season looks like?
It's kind of interesting because I've kind of had it both ways, right? I worked on League primarily on the on the balance stuff for a while. I've now been working on the more seasonal stuff for, at this point, like a year and a half straight. Um, and I think it's kind of interesting because a lot of the time I just find myself, I open up Reddit or Twitter or whatever, and I look at this stuff and I'm like, well, nothing I can do about that. It's like I'm not shipping anything for another 9 months, right? Sorry. Whereas when I was working on the patch to patch stuff, it's kind of cool. Like, you open stuff up, and a lot of times it's, well, like, that's not, this, maybe I don't know if this complaint's real, or but sometimes you can do something about it, right? And so you just go in the next patch and say, hey, you know what? These Soraka players have been complaining that their E doesn't silence people instantly. You know what? I'm gonna go fix that, right? And I did that, 6 months ago or whatever. Um, but the more seasonal stuff is kind of interesting because you can do something really big, right? And so an example of one of the ones that I worked on a little bit that I was most happy with was tower plates, right? Where, if you remember, before tower plates, it was like you just lose your turret at like 5 minutes sometimes, and it just sucked, right? And it was, the game was just kind of sad when you would be playing top lane and someone would just come blow up your turret with Herald or whatever, and you just be, it's just depressed about your life.
Yeah. That sounds like top lane.
Yeah. And then we worked on this turret plates, and it was like this long-term solution where we couldn't do anything on a patch-to-patch basis because there's just nothing we could do about, well, what we were supposed to do, make the towers 10 times as tanky, right? Like, that wasn't a real solution, right? And so the tower plates were awesome, and that kind of thing is one of the things that I really like working on, of like, oh, there was this really hard thing to solve that we fixed in this big update. And tower plates are like, think about how long they've been in the game now. They just feel like part of the game.
Yeah.
But really, they're not there to like just be cool, right? They're there to solve a problem, and that, I think, is really awesome. And that experience is really cool. Having that experience of, I took a like really difficult to solve problem we had in the game for a long time, and fix it. And then I wasn't the person who made tower plates. I just helped out a little bit, but that experience is really cool. And you can have that a little bit on the patch to patch stuff, right? There's some cool small stuff you can do. Like this guy, he's out here, changed this small number, and sometimes that has this crazy cascading effect where, oh, you change this small number here, and then that changes that number over here, and then that has like some great impact. But it's a lot harder to do that in a 2-week patch cycle than it is when you can get art and you can work on something for 6 months straight.
Is it interesting for you to be working on this because you start thinking of what you want to build the next season to look like? Meanwhile, the game is still changing and evolving underneath you. So I imagine it's a little bit like trying to build a house while the foundation keeps shifting, and you're trying to make sure this thing all stays stable on top of like the changes that he and the rest of the other folks are doing throughout the year. Are you guys able to coordinate around that? How does that dynamic work?
There's definitely some coordination that's required, right? I remember last season, David here wanted to buff Blading Jewel or something like that. I think it was, and he was going to make the percent pen higher. And I actually already went, in the seasonal item changes I was working on at the time, I already had it cheaper. And I was like, please do not make the pen higher. Then it's going to be weird. People are going to be like, this item is now cheaper, but it's worse, and it's going to be confusing. And so, we have a conversation for like 2 minutes about it, and then he just changes his list, and we make it cheaper instead. That's like one of the really simple versions of like, oh no, we just do the same change, and so then it's a lot easier. We don't have to worry about whiplash on, hey, this thing has more pen now. It has the same amount of pen it had before, but it's cheaper. Weird stuff like that. small stuff is easy. The bigger stuff can be hard, right? Say like, in past seasons, this has happened where like with the turret plate stuff, for example, there were changes that we were working on during that season to make it at least a little less likely you got your turret blown up in the middle of, in the middle of the laning phase. And we were working on turret plates at the time. It was like, well, do we want to do these changes? Like, right, like we think pro play is probably a little more interesting if your turret's a little less likely to get blown up. But do we want to do these changes and then have to undo them or like overwrite them with turret plates? And sometimes the answer is yeah. Sometimes it's worth it, and you just have to adjust around that. And sometimes the answer is no. Actually, we should just wait for the like what we think is the right change. It can be difficult, right? The coordination is tough, but part of it's interesting, right? I personally think it makes the work more fun, actually, in some ways. Of like, the situation is not always the same one that you started out with, right? I would start working on the item changes, for example, for the item changes that I did, removing the mythics from the game in this season. A lot of the mythics were different by the time from when I started to when I actually made those changes. And so, in some ways I had to, do a pass again on, okay, do I want to keep these items? Which of these items do I want to change? Do I want to change them in a different way? But that was cool to me, being able to see two different states of the previous item system, at the beginning of the season when I started working on it, and then, 75% of the way through the season when I was like starting to lock everything down on removing mythics from the game and doing all the item changes and stuff like that. I think for me it's more fun. It would definitely be easier if everything was just the same, but that's not the world we live in, and I think League of Legends is a better game when it changes a lot.
Yeah. Are there any big system changes that I think that you could see being cool for top lane? Like, how much, whenever a new season patch comes along, do you want to see new stuff hit because it makes the game exciting for you, versus, oh no, I have to like relearn all this stuff, or I have to see these things hit? Kurt.
Well, I mean, it doesn't really matter because it's more about wave management in terms of top lane. So, but I did like the change like last season around the map change itself, and the dragons were pretty nice too. It makes it feel like you can even get like chem plant is like the big one that's noticeable for top lane. It's like, okay, well, if we got dragon then, or if they got dragon, it's like it impacts my lane.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm not sure what to expect or like what I even want really. Kind of just want to be like wowed again, pretty much, because I think last season was pretty good overall, and that was like a big scope change, I would say, compared to like seasons prior. So hoping for that type of change again.
Do either of you? Okay, here's a question for both of you. When pro players start complaining publicly about something, how annoying is that for either of you in your roles?
I don't know what's annoying. What's weird actually is like I think Trophy went and said he loves the 80 carry mid meta.
Yeah.
And I'm like, sorry, bro, it's not gonna stay around. But he's like, my recollection is like, I'm having fun. I'm just right click people. It's great. I'm like, oh, that's kind of nice, right? At least someone's not hating it.
Yeah.
Obviously, again, the viewer experience is pretty bad, but actually playing 80 carries is pretty fun. Watching 80 carries is often pretty boring. But that's just unfortunate, but true. Yeah, I mean, it can suck when there's the complaints. In the back of my head, I always remember like, okay, but it always takes time for bros to adapt. So it's like, oh man, NASA's so broken. It's like, well, where were you guys 6 months ago? Because it's been this way. Like that's always like in my head. So it's always like kind of sad when it's like, if you ever get like the one side of it, they don't give the other, which is like, but also we missed it, but also he's been broken, and I kind of hope like viewers will accept that as well. But like everyone's imperfect, right? Like you guys never get everything right first try, obviously. Like we obviously don't get everything right first try, and like viewers are also gonna have their own imperfect perception. So it's like as long as everyone knows that everyone's doing their best and we're only partway there, like that is fine. And we'll get things wrong, so it's fine.
Are there times where you're like, why won't they figure this out? This is actually so good.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You just have to give a little shout out in your patch preview vids.
Yeah. When you guys do stuff right. There was something like 2 years ago, or whatever, where Corki was like 53% win rate mid lane and was still not in pro, and we're like, guys, pros play Corki when he's 47. This guy's like 8% overpowered, and pros are not playing him. What's going on? And then you finally did, and we nerfed him by 5%. You're still playing him. I was like, yeah, that makes sense.
Do you or the team analysts ever look at these patch previews and try to glean some sort of, because theoretically they have maybe better understanding of what's going into it because they were the ones that are putting it together. So do you guys study these at all?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to go through it. My coaches go through it, and then we kind of see what the variance is in terms of like, I think Phreak always talks about like how much of a different this will change in terms of win rate wise. So kind of gauge it off that. If it's like a 1% win rate, then it's just a slight tap compared to like a bigger nerf, whatever that might be. So yeah, definitely look at it as, I mean, yeah.
This is very off topic, but just a little bit ago we heard one of the songs from Arcane Season 1 playing.
Nice.
As Arcane Season 2 is on the horizon, is there a lot of pressure to make sure that certain champions like Jinx or Vi or Jace are playable?
I have had absolutely no one tell me to do anything about this.
Jace,
Like
Jace
absolutely
did get buffs.
Absolutely, yeah, it's true. I buffed Jace because I thought Jace could just like, we're playing AD mids and no one's playing Uxin and Jace. What's going on, guys? I'm actually shocked that there's still no Uxin players. I think the champ's actually very good, but
Really? I mean, his passive got nerfed so much.
I know.
Q movement speed, or like all the movement speed got nerfed.
So the thing is, like, his wins are still absurd. Like, if you control for champ mastery or not, he's like the highest win rate mid laner and top laner in the game. Now, I'm not saying solo Q power is pro power. Like, we know these are different, right? But it's like, if you're a like reasonably good Uxin player, it's like, yeah, he's just literally strong. He like wins more games in Challenger than Vayne does. Just like, it's just true. Like, the game ends with his Nexus, living. But again, pros don't play him, and like he's pretty unpopular. It's like, that's too bad. But like he seems to be good for any data I can possibly look at, no matter where you slice it. So I was like, okay, this guy's pretty good. We can't really buff him. But like, yeah, it's like, how the hell is people like not playing Jace when like this champ's been in pro play for a million years? Like, people love playing their ranged AD top and mid. Yeah, he's not the same kind of hyper carry that like Smolder is, but like, I don't know. That kind of stuff is weird to me. But anyway, to get out to the point, no one from Skins ever says, yo, we're gonna release this Ari sync, can you buff her? No one ever goes, hey, so Arcane's coming out, can you make sure the Arcane champs are good? That's no, we don't do that.
Yeah, I almost kind of wish, I as heretical as this might be, I almost kind of wish that was something you all thought about, because I know that when Arcane Season 1 hit, like all those champs spiked a ton in player rate.
Oh yeah,
right?
of course.
Oh yeah.
And so I'm sure, I guess maybe then the answer is like, oh, well, we don't really need to buff them if people are going to play them anyway. But I'm sure that there is a desire from people to make sure that, like, I'm sure the people playing them want to make sure that they're viable or would love them to be viable.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm sure there'd be value in like, oh, let's really ensure that playing these champions is fun, right?
Yeah.
It's enjoyable or whatever. But again, like, I literally have no idea what skins are coming out. I'm sure it would be enjoyable if people enjoyed Mordekaiser when a new Mordekaiser skin came out as well,
I
right?
mean,
But like,
I worry less about skins.
yeah,
and
I know
more just
that like feels more unethical, but
Yeah.
I'm certainly aware of who's in Arcane.
Yeah.
I'm certainly aware like who the champions are, and I also know all their win rates almost by heart. So I'm
Yeah.
like, well, yeah, they're probably something in the back of my head who's like, oh yeah, is Jinx's win rate right? She's one of the main characters after all.
Yeah.
So like I can't, like, again, no one tells me to do it, but like I clearly know who's in the show.
Yeah,
So it's in my brain.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. Well, hey, Dokla, I think we might let you go
Yeah.
because I know you've been up here for a little bit, but I really appreciate you coming by. How's before you say goodbye, anything that folks should know about what's going on at the NRG booth? You can pitch these wonderful folks to go over there after we're done.
Well, we're doing a meet and greet, and then we ran out of mouse pads because so many people came by and pictures. So and a chance to win something Kia related.
There's a giveaway, an exciting giveaway.
yeah, some Kia
And people
giveaway.
can find out what it is by going over to the NRG
It's a
booth.
mystery.
Yes, very
Make
good.
sure you come over, check it out.
Yeah.
Can you
Thanks
rig
so
it for
much.
me?
Anything you,
Can you rig the draw for me so that I win?
I'll try.
Yeah.
All right, thanks, bud.
as long as you're rigging champions for him. So
Yeah.
anything
we'll
you
find
want
everything
to
for Worlds.
right over here? These are your cameras. Anything you want to say to any fans out there?
Thanks for the turnout. Every time you go to a league event like this, where it's like just a bunch of people, it's like, this is one thing we all have in common. It's just we love league, and that's why we're all here. So it's really nice to be with everyone who shares the same passion. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna head off into a break now, but also want to say thank you again to Dokla for coming up, and looking forward to seeing you next year. Thanks, man.
See ya.
Hello?
Well, what are you parking?
Seriously? What is that?
Remote smart parking assist. You could have parked anywhere.
They could have parked there. They could have parked there.
All right, we are back here. We were just talking a little bit about how fun of these conversations we've been having. We are going to switch over, I think, to taking some questions from the audience. So if people out there, especially you all walking by, if you have questions For some Riot developers, you want to ask them about buffing or nerfing your favorite champion, we'll be taking questions both live and also from chat, Twitch chat, and YouTube chat if folks want to put those in. I think that the way we can do this is if folks want to line up or stand over by this little stanchion here, that would be great. Yes, exactly. Right where you're at. They'll help you find your spot, Horizon. They'll give you that microphone and we'll get you up. And then, yeah, if people want to come up and ask questions, we'll be taking them here on stage. It looks like we're getting the camera and everything set up right now. But again, we're at FanFest. Thank you to Kia. We're at the Kia stage right now next to the 2025 K4, an amazing new car coming out from Kia. Looks like we should be good to go. I'm waiting for the thumbs up from our lovely camera person. There we go. Okay, so what is your name?
My name is Horizon Cast.
Where are you joining us from?
Houston, Texas.
Houston, Texas. Welcome to FanFest. What would you like to ask our lovely Riot devs today?
So I have two questions. One's a little bit longer, one's an easy one. The
Sure.
first question is from a development standpoint, both short and long, is there a point of diminishing returns with champion development? Is there a point where like you guys are like, we don't think we need to do any more champions? And then the second question is when you guys release a patch or a change or whatever, and people are complaining about it, like, oh, this is going to be terrible, and then it turns out it's really good. Is there that moment of like, aha, we told you so?
So is mine working? Yeah, here we go. The answer to the second one is yes. We get it wrong too, of course, sometimes, right? But it's like, yep, got him. It's always fun when we get that one. As far as diminishing returns, yes, right? So an easy one to think about is champion balance, where it's really easy just to measure win rates within like 12 hours of being live. There's tens of thousands of games immediately, and it's like, oh, okay, we have a pretty good reliable read on how strong the champion is. We could play test, 3 times a day, spend 3 hours a day of 10 people to just to see how strong this champion is, right? It's like, hey, is Briar powerful enough? It's like, well, has this person learned Briar, right? It has to be a certain person who's actually gotten up the mastery curve. I guess someone else who is their skill level in their role, who also knows their champion. And it's like, we can do that, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. But it's like, well, we'll just get pretty close, and then we'll figure it out when it goes live. Is just way more worth the effort to spend your time just making other stuff usually.
Did you have a follow? You had kind of a two-part question.
Yeah, well, I asked both parts.
Okay, cool, fantastic. Well, hey, thank you so much
Absolutely.
for joining us.
Thank you, Travis Gafford.
Yeah. All right,
You're
we'll
welcome.
switch to a quick question right now from the chat. Okay, so Legendary Gruel says, could there be any interesting changes to summoner spells? I know you're not allowed to talk about what you're working on, but I guess summoner spells are a core part of the game. So how do you approach pieces like that?
Yeah, so I when I think about pitching changes, right? Because at the beginning of the year, when we ship our big preseason, right, we then have to decide, okay, well, what are we doing for next year? And one of the things that I do when I'm pitching, hey, what big changes do we want to make for next year, is I look at what systems have we not changed the longest, right? And summoner spells is one that always comes up as, yeah, this system gets small changes, right? Balance changes like, barrier, what was that, 0.5 seconds duration?
Yeah, and 10% more shield.
Yeah, so we do small changes from time to time, right? Barrier is not a summoner from the original league, for example, right? That was made, actually, this is a kind of cool hidden story. I don't know if this is true, but this is what I've been told, is that someone made barrier because they were replacing the B button in ARAM, and they just said B stands for barrier, and apparently that's how barrier got made. Again, I wasn't there, I don't know if that's true, but anyway, summoners are one of the spaces that has just not been, they just haven't been changed in a huge systemic way in the longest time, basically since the beginning of League. And so it's one of the spaces that comes up a lot, but then ultimately when we look into actually doing changes for summoner spells, one of the things that we kind of come to realize pretty quickly, almost every single time we look into doing work, is, first of all, people don't really like it when their summoner spells are doing really crazy things, right? The summoner spells are pretty simple, right? Flash, ignite, barrier, heal, right? And so there's not a ton of really simple design space. We can't just easily make a new summoner, right? I think there's space for a few more, but it's not like we could go easily make 5 more summoners that are equally as simple and understandable as the ones we currently have. So that's kind of a problem. And then if we wanted to make extra, say we wanted to make them upgrade, or you could buy upgrades to summoner spells like you used to be able to buy boot upgrades, for example. That's something we've talked about before. That also is kind of difficult because it kind of crosses into the space of doing what items do. And so there's space there for sure, but we'd have to find the right way to do it, I think. Whereas a lot of the other systems we can update like items or like, void monsters, right? That's like this season where we did void grubs instead of herald, and then like changed herald and, did the baron changes and stuff like that. The difficulty with doing summoner spells, we kind of have to find the right way to do it. Whereas with a lot of the other systems we can change, we can just kind of do it, and it's not a concern for, for like, okay, well, does this work with how the system works, right? Because when we changed grubs, or when we added grubs to the game, it's kind of like, well, you just do these, right? You just kill them like a normal monster, and that doesn't cause any issues around like player, not meeting player expectations of what a summoner spell does, right? So that's kind of difficult. Again, it's like, I personally am a fan of the idea of changing summoners, and so I would hope one day we'll get there. But at the same time, I think our summoners are pretty good, right? And so they kind of have held up to the test of time of, yeah, Ignite is still cool, right? Like, who doesn't like igniting people, right? Who doesn't like Flash, right? And so from the perspective of, is it on fire? No. But from the perspective of, could they be cooler? I think definitely yes.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you for the answer. Oh, we have another question from the audience. What's your name, sir?
My name is Freely Dan. I'm from Grass Valley, California.
Nice. What question do you have for our devs here?
Well, I'm a C9 fan, so I was hoping you could buff JoJo's LeBlanc, or at least teach him how to play it.
Oh.
Thing is, she was OP when he played her last, right? When we nerfed her in 0.17. So I mean, he had the overpowered version of LeBlanc. That's a skill issue, man.
Yeah.
That's really unfortunate.
No, but in reality, my question is, so I know you guys always look at win rate, but you're also always looking at pick rate as well. What prevents you from giving a champion that's way underpicked like like 3 extra AD or a 1 second cooldown on one of their abilities, just to get them like on the radar so people start picking them a little bit more?
Yeah, this can actually be a pretty complex answer. It's like, do we want to buff something that we know is actually balanced, but he's not very popular, right? And so there's a couple things here, right? So one is we're generally willing, like mildly, to let unpopular, overpowered things to remain a little bit overpowered. And again, this is by like 1 or 2%, right? It's like, this champion's like a little bit better than other champions. And it's like, okay, well, they're not in games very often. They're not often ruining your experience. And there's some value in just having a variety of experience. Like if you're a Garen one trick, you actually running into more different champions, even if like technically Warwick's a little bit OP, but like there's otherwise no Warwick players, is like probably a slight positive for the game overall, even if like you're down 1% win rate in the 1 in 70 games where Warwick's your opponent. Like that's probably actually a positive for the game overall. And it's like, okay, well, in the same token, do we like willingly buff things that are unplayed but technically balanced? Sometimes, I guess, like more for things like Worlds and MSI, where we're like, actually, Akali is probably okay, but we could give her 1% because she's an assassin pros will actually play and it's worth it for the viewer experience. Yeah, it's another one where we can like choose to make the game less balanced. At the end of the day, like the most important thing is not actually every champion is equally powerful. The most important thing is League of Legends is fun. Part of that is that the game feels competitive, aka the balance state's pretty good. Part of that is that there's a big variety of experiences, and there's 170 champions you might actually play against. And so, you kind of have to compete those priorities, which is why it's a sort of a complex answer.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Going back to the chat over on YouTube, Austin asks, is there any chance of pitting Snowball in Summoner's Rift?
This has been tried many times, I think.
Internally?
Yeah. So we've experimented with, like, for example, when we were doing Runes Reforged, there was a keystone that replaced one of your summoners with Snowball. We've tried it in a number of different ways. Like that's one example. I think I tried it on an item, actually. Like it was an item active, one of the tank support items I was working on for the current season. It was called Go In button, and it just threw a snowball. We've tried it a bunch of times. I think maybe there's a way of doing it, but it's difficult. It's like Snowball was designed for a singular purpose, right? Which was to enable these melee champions that couldn't interact in ARAM. And the problem is, in ARAM there's no flanking, but in Summoner's Rift there is a lot of flanking. So when you give the, Alistar, for example, Snowball, and also the ability to flank, it's kind of a lot. And so ultimately the answer is like, maybe one day. Again, it's something people try every couple of years in development. Like internally, we test it in some system, right? Whether it's items or runes or whatever. But ultimately, it's a tool that was used to solve a problem that doesn't exist in SR, and so because of that, I think it's kind of unlikely in its exact current form, just because unless we suddenly started having the problem of like, well, Alistar can't flank for some reason. Well, yeah, maybe Snowball's the right solution to that problem, but as like a thing that we put in the game, it's kind of over solving a problem, if that makes sense, that isn't actually a problem in SR, and so that sort of leads us to not make that thing.
All right, our next question is from the audience. What's your name?
My name is Justin. I'm from New York, across the country. What the question I have is just which pertains to reworks. Is there a process that you guys use to determine who gets the next rework? Because you have champions that are very old, like Annie and Singed, who have these very outdated kits or very simple and very mundane kits compared to the newer kits you see in some of the champions today, where, you know, Nasus's entire kit has less words in it than Action's passive or his W or whatever it is. Is there a process that you go into to determine who gets that next rework, or like what you want to see changed in those champions that are more simplistic and mundane, or even if you want to see them changed and more just a general update to make them more refined for current year in meta?
Yeah, so there is a process. Neither of us are super involved in it because that's more on the champions team and their their production section. I can give you sort of some like brief points of like some of the things that they consider, but I don't actually know like the full scope of like exactly at what point, you know, what's the threshold for this part of the process or anything. But it's like a lot of things go into it, like, hey, who's the most lacking visually, right? Like, you know, this is, for example, one of the things that got Skarner was a combination of his visuals are really outdated, his pick rate's really low, you know, his gameplay is under, you know, pretty under our standards for a modern kit, right? And so it's like those are three, I think, of the most important pillars of visually. How good do they look? How good is their gameplay? And what was the third one? I actually just forgot.
I don't remember.
Okay, well, whatever I said, which I've immediately forgotten. Sorry, it's kind of bright up here. It's hard to look.
Visuals, gameplay, popularity.
Yeah, visuals, gameplay, and popularity. That's it. Yeah, so those three are I think three of the more important factors, but there are other things that are considered that we may not be aware of, which it's hard, you know, it's hard for me to know because neither of us work on the champions team, and so that's more in their area.
But for smaller scale stuff, like for example, I have some Swain work in flight, hopefully by the end of the year, but it's when I have time for it. Is like, hey, this champion is actually quite popular, but there's like problems to solve, right? It's like he wins a lot of games in mid, but feels like ass when he's playing there. So it's like, okay, well, you know, are there ways we can just make him feel better? Because he's actually, you know, been a reasonably popular champion before. And so it's even things like, oh, the trend in popularity has gone down. He doesn't feel modern anymore. Oh, okay, well, there's some like low scope changes I can probably do to the kit that'll make him feel more modern, and that like per win rate, per power level can feel like a better champion. That's, you know, something worth doing. And it's a matter of being like, hey, I have an idea for a thing, getting it prioritized, carving out time for it, doing it instead of other work, and being like, yeah, I'm gonna go, you know, make some Swain update and like make his spells a little bit different, and hopefully, you know, result in a better champion. So there are some smaller scale stuff as well that an individual driver can just choose to drive on. And then again, you get it prioritized, you get the time for it, and you go. And then when it's ready, you get to ship it.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the question.
Thank you very much for having me.
I see a really great one from Tyrannosaurus over on Twitch, who says, how will balance evaluation change with the switch to Fearless Draft format? Because the esports team has announced that they're going to be embracing Fearless Draft a lot more stuff, especially in the beginning of the season.
Good on that.
So yeah, I'm curious how this impacts balance changes, if at all.
Yeah. Generally speaking, we've been in active meetings with esports about this. I was the designer charged with figuring out a new esports draft format. Looked at a lot of stuff. Fearless was the best one, but like I gave them like a list of like 7 different options. And they're like, yeah, Fearless is the best one. I was like, that's what I thought. So yeah, like part of it is like, hey, let's make the experience better. Like let's make the experience more positive to like watch the games out. That's also removes some of the burden on having to balance for pro play for regular solo queue. It's like you look at a champion like Corki in solo queue, and it's like he's not that offensive. The ban rate's very low. The pick rate's like still 10x what it was, like from old Corki. So I was like, that's still a success. Obviously, he's very stale in pro, and that sucks. So it's like, well, wouldn't it be great if he just magically wasn't stale in pro play anymore via esports format changes? Wouldn't that be cool?
By the way, did you see? Sorry to interrupt. Did you see Commissioner Mark Zimmerman?
Oh, Commissioner Mark,
over there.
Former LCS caster Mark Zimmerman.
Wow.
Wow. Boo.
Yeah, exactly.
Boo the commish. Boo. Okay. So it does some really nice things on our side, which is like, oh, we don't have to balance champions around pro as often, where it's like, if we're not in a world where Red has to lose a ban every single game, that probably still kind of sucks. But if it's like, oh man, we only got Corki Azir one game in the best of 5. it's fine. You know, like whatever. Like, yeah, you get your one quirky Azir game. Anyway, moving on. They're gonna play some other stuff now, and we can like let them be their appropriate power level for solo queue.
Yeah, very good. All right, we have a little bit more time for maybe 2 more questions. How about yourself, sir?
Hi. So my name's Cullen. I'm from Boston. So League has a lot of champions, and probably there's more on the way. Are you guys ever worried that the release of a champion might functionally replace an older champion just because there's so many? And how do you kind of design around that so you don't end up replacing older champions?
So yeah, just to clarify, just because I know the mic's a little quiet. When a new champion comes out, it sounds like you're saying when a new champion comes out, is there ever worry that it's going to push out other champions from the game? And how do you design around that potential issue?
Yeah, so some of this, again, comes down to champion design, which again, that's a different team than us, but we definitely talk to them. We understand them, hopefully at least a little. But the answer is yeah. Are we concerned about this? Like, yes, and that's part of what we spend a lot of the time in champions dev on, is making sure that they either do something unique or feel a specific unique way, right? One of the things that champions team used to do, which they've relaxed a little bit on, was like every champion had to do something that was completely unique to them, right? Examples of this was like the Pantheon BGU's directional invulnerability, right? Like no one else did that, right? Still no one else does that. There's similar things, right? Like Brahm's shield and stuff like that, and like Windwall's sort of like a little similar, but like nobody else did that, right? And in the modern day, it's more about, I think it's more focused on creating a unique experience rather than having a specific unique mechanic, right? You look at like Smolder, it's like, well, nothing he does is actually truly a unique mechanic that's only him. I guess maybe his E sort of, but Kayn also walks through walls, right? But the whole experience, that you put all that together, and it is a unique experience that you have of like, oh, you're a baby dragon who grows up and becomes a big, elder dragon executor, right? Even though all the things are different, are mechanics that other champions have in the same way. Ultimately, though, I think a lot of this comes down to just making kits that are fun, and in some ways it can actually be good when we take parts of a player base and split them up, right? Like as the best example of this is Yasuo, right? There was a time many years ago where Yasuo was in so many games that we were legitimately concerned that League of Legends didn't have enough variance in game to game because Yasuo was in every game, and it felt like some people actually felt like every game was about Yasuo. And over the years, we've made many champions that share some similarities to Yasuo, but are not exactly the same, right? Yone is obviously a big one, but there's also champions like Aurelia, Akali, even Samira, where these champions each took a little bit of the Yasuo player base and made something that felt special and unique for them, like the things that they really enjoyed about Yasuo, and let them play something that was more unique in that way. And so in some ways it can be good if there's a new champion who takes some aspect of an older champion's kit and takes that to the max, right? And makes that the thing that they're about. And then, makes that an experience that the players who really like that part of that kit get to have that experience turned up to the maximum, right? And that can be really good. But to the actual question, like the actual core of the question is like, yes, absolutely, that is a concern. And it's something that we spend a lot of our champions dev time on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. All right, we're on our last question here from a man. Do you recognize this jersey?
What's on the back?
Nothing's on the back.
Oh, just okay.
Yeah, TSM.
Yeah. I thought there was like more to it.
No,
Yes,
it's
TSM.
TSM.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know they're not. I know you haven't been in the LCS for a bit, but
I left and then like, wow, maybe it was me.
What's your name, sir?
Hi, my name's Sean.
Where are you? What do you want to talk about?
I guess it's a more generic question in terms of like, how do you approach using data for balance changes? I know everyone always talks about win rate, but like, I personally also work with data, and it's never just one win rate or like one number you can always look at and be like, all right, this is what I'm going to tweak for.
Yeah.
So what do you do for that? Yeah.
So the current, so generally speaking, it's like, hey, we use data, and then the most important thing is, okay, a designer actually makes a choice here. And so it's like, the people make the calls at the end of the day. It's interesting because some of the discussions around like, hey, what's correct for like objectivity versus subjectivity, right? It's like, if I just am really biased against burst mages and I just hate burst, and it's like, well, that's cute that Ari's win rate's fair. She's supposed to be 48 because she does burst damage, and burst damage sucks in League of Legends. Like, there could be a problem there, right? And I don't believe that, but like that would be pretty bad for the game. So it's nice to have some objectivity to be like, I know you think this, but like, here's the data. It doesn't seem to be true, or it is true, or whatever. So the way that like the primary, if I get like one data pipeline, the thing that I care the most about is mastery adjusted win rates. And so this is like, hey, so assuming you're like mastery level 20 on your champion, what's your win rate on like Akali or Ari or Akshan or Anivia or Annie or any other A mid laners? And it's like, oh, okay, well, assuming you're quite competent, actually Ari and Akali are pretty similar. And Anivia's like statistically very overpowered. Now, does that mean we have to nerf Anivia right away? No, because she's not causing any problems. But like the data says Anivia is actually the best mid laner in the game right now. And Akshan's second place. And do we have to care? Maybe not, right? And he's like in third, basically. She's like 1% OP from the data. And if players ever are like, man, Anivia's really BS, we're like, well, she is overpowered technically. So like, sure, we can just nerf her some, whatever. But meanwhile, you're like, man, people sure hate playing against Morgana. And it's like, well, she's like technically weak. So it's like, well, we should probably make other changes then that like deal with frustration, because it's not a power issue. It's a, man, fighting Morgana sucks issue. Okay, well, that helps us understand like how we should probably try to solve the issue, because it's great when you can solve it by like -3 AD. It's great. It's so free. It's really easy. Don't think about it. Not a problem. Cool, no problem, right? But when they don't line up, then it's like, okay, well, data indicates power level, as long as you kind of account for it. Player sentiment indicates something else entirely. Okay, well, how can we jive with these two things and make like the better change for the game?
Awesome. That's great. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for the question. All right, so that is it. I want to thank both of you for sitting in the sun for the past hour.
And there's lights on us, as though the sun's not enough.
And the lights. There's a giant Aatrox.
And you're so hot, so.
Yes. Thank you. That's at the end of the stream here. That's what I needed, as I'm covered in sweat. Okay. Anything that either of you would like to say to any of the fans out there?
League of Legends.
League of Legends.
Hey, perfect. Thank you so much. That was exactly what I needed. For everyone here, thank you all for joining us, and thanks to everybody who asked questions and everybody who came on stage. We will be back tomorrow at 10 for Live Hotline League. So it's going to be really fun. We're going to have a bunch of guests from the teams and other folks. There might be a commissioner who might be making an appearance. So it's going to be really fun. But again, thank you so much to Kia for bringing us out here. It's been really fun. Check out the K4 over there if you have a chance. It looks like you were going to say something.
League of Legends.
Okay. Either way, thanks everyone for watching. We'll see you tomorrow here at FanFest.